Hello, everyone, and welcome to Open Door Philosophy, a podcast where a high school philosophy teacher, that's me, and his former student who's currently studying philosophy in college,
that's me,
unpack a variety of big philosophical concepts in an understandable way, all towards the purpose of living a good life. Welcome to episode 22, a special episode where we get to discuss our favorite philosophy books. So look forward to that. But before we get to that, y'all, it is time. Andrew and I are so in the zone of Thanksgiving, right? Like it's so near. So let's catch up. Andrew, how is life in your academic world?
Life has been pretty good. I'm finishing up my really long Aristotle paper right now. In a future episode, I will have to talk about that because it's been a good time. But I think it's appropriate, as always, to talk about the weather real quick.
Oh, yeah.
And it's been freezing cold outside lately. Maybe freezing's an exaggeration, but
it's an exaggeration. It's been in the 40s for lows.
It's cold for me, too cold for me. So it's been a huge contrast. It was in the 80s last week, pretty hot, and then the next day it's been freezing for me. But it's been a nice change. So it's put me in the Christmas spirit.
Ah, good. So does rice do autumn well? Like, does the campus?
I don't think particularly well.
Aesthetically,
I think it's just the trees are always pretty green, so that's nice. I think nothing really dies even during winter, so that's nice too. So I think it looks pretty much the same. It's just colder, which is nice in some ways, but whatever.
Well, maybe people will wear scarves and you'll feel like you're in the Northeast.
I'll probably be the only one wearing a scarf. I seem to be the only one who's cold.
I was going to say, it is achingly beautiful outside. I think today the high is 70 degrees, sunny and 70. Holy moly. Like, people who live in Houston, we just die for this weather. I'm so glad it's here. Anyway, we had a fire in the fireplace a couple days ago, Andrew.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah, we didn't really need it. And let me tell you, if you live outside of Houston, fireplaces are really not necessary. It's more like a comfortable affection or something. But we do enjoy them. If it gets all the way down into the 50s or something, we might have a fire in the fireplace. So it makes things nice and cozy.
That sounds. My grandfather, he has this kind of, in his house, he has a wood stove, and that's the only heater in the house. So that's always really nice when I go over there. It's a blast from the past, I guess.
Oh yeah. My grandparents up in Oklahoma had a wood burning stove in their living room. That's how they heated the house. Yeah, it's really cool.
Anyway, how have you been doing?
Oh, I am so overwhelmed right now. But the payoff is Thanksgiving break. Just lots of irons in the fire right now. But, it's fine to be overwhelmed as long as the work is good work and it's meaningful work. And it is. And so being overwhelmed is not really a complaint here. But I have lots to do. And that's okay because it's good work. But on another note, 2 episodes ago, we did an episode on transcendentalism. And last week, we're studying transcendentalism with my year 2 students. And last week, we took a field trip. I always joke about taking a field trip. We're like, what field trips can you take in philosophy? But last week, we took a field trip and went up to the Sam Houston National Forest and took a 6.5-mile hike through the woods and did some really neat things. We brought our favorite Emerson and Thoreau quotes and read them, and had some companionable silence, we call it, where we walk together in silence for 20 minutes or whatever. And we sat around ponds and walked through trees and noticed things, and it was just a really good time. So we did that, and I wish every single week of school one day could be dedicated to hiking in the woods.
That sounds nice. I was meaning to ask you about that because I I woke up on that day and it was just pouring cats and dogs over here. So I was wondering if y'all would get to do that. I know that was something you were worried about, but it sounds like it went through.
Yeah, that's when that cold front came through, some really nasty weather. But we were lucky. We were going to go out to lunch. This is way too much detail probably for people. But we were going to go out to lunch after our hike, but to try to wait out the rain, because we knew it was coming about 8 a.m. and it was going to be a strong, fast-moving front, we went to breakfast instead of lunch. And the storm hit, and it even knocked out the electricity of the restaurant we were having breakfast at, shut down the kitchen.
Oh my goodness.
But by the time we got to the trailhead, we hiked in the rain for about 30 minutes. And then the rain stopped, and it just became a beautiful blue sky day with temperatures in the 60s. It was amazing.
I'm glad it all worked out. I know you're excited for that, so I'm glad.
Okay, everybody, before we get to the main part of our episode where we talk about our books, Andrew, don't we have a special announcement to make?
Yeah, so after this episode, we are going to be taking a few weeks off to prepare for season 2 of the Open Door Philosophy podcast, and also to give us both some time to finish up our semesters on a high note and get all that stuff out of the way so we can put our focus on second season. So
yeah, it's been a real blast doing this first season with you, Andrew. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. We folks, when you make a podcast, well, at least when we made a podcast, we didn't really know exactly what its trajectory was going to be and what it would look like and whether we would have seasons and all of that kind of stuff. But for right now, it makes sense for us to take a few months off, and we will be back in mid-January. So look for season 2 of Open Door Philosophy coming the second week of January.
Yeah, I've had a great time doing this podcast with you too, and it's been something I've looked forward to every week, and I hope that everybody who's listening feels similarly, because I'm also excited for the episodes to come out, but I'm a little biased in that sense too, I suppose.
Yeah, totally agree with you. I look forward to these Sunday mornings when we record and talking about the thing that both of us mutually love, philosophy, and hopefully doing it in a way that people enjoy and is meaningful for their lives. So that's where we would like to talk to you, the listener, about season 2. We say it at the end of every single episode that we would love to hear from you, and it's absolutely true. So being that we have a couple of months here to plan out season 2, we of course have plenty of time. Andrew and I seem to have inexhaustible topics on philosophy, but we would, but in planning season 2, I mean, we'd really love to talk about some topics that you, the listener, would be interested in. So whether that's, theories about the soul and religion or nihilism or, whatever, take your pick of whatever philosophical topics just kind of burning there inside your head. And let us know. Email us at opendoorphilosophy@gmail.com or hit us up on Twitter or Instagram. Seriously, we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, that would be great. I know when we first started this podcast, we agreed that if we only had a few listeners, we would be happy with our progress, just filling the world with our passion, I guess. So it's been great to see our expectations have been over.
Yeah, we've exceeded those expectations.
Right, that's the word. We've exceeded our expectations, so we're really thankful for that. And this isn't supposed to be a Thanksgiving episode, but we're thankful for everybody listening. So appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, looking at our numbers on the amount of listens we get per week, there's no way the people who are listening, all of them are like just our best friends or whatever supporting us. We definitely have listeners out there who are not personally associated with us, which is fantastic. Like the numbers are good and they're growing, and that's exciting and encouraging. So please, once again, let us know of your ideas, and shoot, if you just want to let us know that you're thankful for what we've done and all of that, we'd be happy to hear all of that. Okay, everyone. So here we go. Our favorite books. if you've been a longtime listener, you'll remember that first couple of episodes, every week we would talk about the books we were currently reading. And we ended up talking about the books we're currently reading so long in the episode that the episodes were almost becoming like what we were currently reading instead of some philosophical topic. So we cut that out. So now just, all these months later, I thought we'd take an episode where we talk about some of our favorite philosophy books in general. And so Andrew and I have both chosen a few, and we're just going to talk about those today, just going to kind of riff on them. So Andrew, I'm going to put you on the spot. You can go first. What's your first book you want to bring up?
Well, my list is in no means in order, but I have to give the first book on my list to Plato's Republic. I don't think anybody's surprised there. I think this book represents my introduction to philosophy in a lot of ways. It was my first book of philosophy that I ever picked up. I remember I was recommended it by someone, found a copy at Half Price Books on Montrose. Remember that very clearly. And I just started reading it, and I was just kind of shocked. I heard some concepts in that book, but it really kind of was the spark. I think that Socrates would have wanted me to have at that age. So I have to put that one first. It covers so many topics of philosophy, and it's so deep, but also so accessible too, that anybody can just pick it up. And every time you read it, you'll learn something new about a plethora of philosophical ideas. There's ethics in there, epistemology, metaphysics, literally anything you want to find, you can find it in Plato's Republic. So it's an awesome book, and I'm happy to put that first on my, well, I guess not first on my list, but on my list.
Yeah. Hey, I don't want to break your heart, but did you know that Half Price bookstore in Montrose no longer exists?
I know. I was driving past it on Friday, actually, and I was just very sad because
No, I was going to say, I think they tore down the old shopping center, didn't they?
Yeah,
they're building something new.
They tore down the entire thing, and it's really sad because there used to be one within walking distance of Rice in Rice Village, and that one also went out of business. So I was going to the one on Montrose. I've been going there ever since 7th or 8th grade, I think, and yeah, I was just really sad to see. So I don't know what's up with that, but
yeah, it was a cool building.
Really cool.
Yeah, it had I remember one wall was just exposed brick. It's just an old building. It's a cool bookstore. Yeah. So is there anything one thing specific from the Republic that you can think of that you're like, this is one of my favorite parts, like an example?
Well, I'll give two short examples for this. I think obviously we've talked about these. If you've been a constant listener since the beginning, I think our second episode was on Plato's allegory of the cave, which is probably the most famous allegory in all of Western philosophy. So I could talk about those allegories and how influential they've been in just philosophy as a whole, and how much you can learn from those. But I would also say, and I think that's true, also you can look in Book 2 or the Ring of Gyges example. I think we've talked about that as well. Both of those are influential, not only in philosophical thought, but the Matrix takes a lot of ideas from Book 7, so that's cool. And then Book 2, Ring of Gyges with Lord of the Rings. So it's just influenced so much, and I think that's really cool to see where these ideas started. But also, personally, in the past probably 2 years or so, I've noticed with Plato's Republic, it's really cool to learn about objective ethics in the sense of, there's a reason for me to be doing good that's beyond good. Well, I guess it's beyond goodness itself, but I think a lot of people in my generation, I know this, I'm pretty sure just from a lot of conversations that I've had, but they tend to turn towards moral relativism. And I think I don't see how that idea can last very long, but I think reading about that in Plato's Republic is not, the same thing going on back then. It's not something, it's kind of comforting in the sense that people were thinking about that back then, and there's answers to that I think are pretty strong, especially in the Republic. So I think that's great.
Awesome. So the Republic was written in classical Greek. Is there a translation you prefer? Or are they all pretty good?
So the translation that I would recommend to everybody who's interested in the Republic is the GMA Grubb translation. You can find this online as well if you look for it. I think that's a really good translation of Plato's Republic, just because it has a lot of good notes in the text about kind of what's going on too. And we'll link this somewhere. We'll link this on our website, I'm sure. But I think that's a fantastic translation. There's some bad translations out there, but I would say for the most part, I think most of them are pretty good. You can find some that are more. The cool thing about Plato too. Sorry, I don't want to do a Plato rant, but I think this is important. The cool thing about Plato is he's both such a great philosopher, but he's also such a great author, a literary author too. So you can definitely find translations that prioritize the kind of lyricism that Plato has, while maybe sacrificing the clarity that I think is really apparent. Clarity is maybe not the best word, but accessibility. But I also think you're going to find translations too that focus on that philosophical clarity that our listeners might be more interested in, and that's why I recommended the Grub, I don't know, Grube translation. So that's great.
So the first book I've chosen to talk about today is by Albert Camus, and that book is The Plague. So with my selections of books, I tried to pick a number of varieties. I have, this is a work of fiction. I also have a biography, and then I have some, what would be considered primary source philosophy. So Camus was a novelist, although he has fiction. He has nonfiction pieces like The Myth of Sisyphus and a number of other essays. But this particular work is fiction. So one of the projects that Camus was concerned about was this theory that he called absurdism. And we haven't really talked about it on the show, other than I think we've had a quote or two in the quote corner from Camus. But he talks about, he was an existentialist and an absurdist. So it's kind of a fine line between existentialism and absurdism. But either way, what's great about this book is three things. One, One is that Camus is an amazing writer, and he just writes so beautifully, and everyone should read this book because it's a beautiful piece of literature. But outside of that, philosophically speaking, obviously in the last 18 months or so, the world has been going through a pandemic. And once that pandemic began, it was kind of interesting. Copies of Camus' The Plague actually sold out on Amazon. They ran out of copies because so many people were buying it. So it's a really relevant book because one of the big questions, especially a year and a half ago when we were all on lockdown, one of the big questions like, well, what does all this mean and how do we navigate this and all that kind of stuff, those kind of questions. So everyone picked up The Plague. And so it's a book about, or it's a story about a city in Algeria that contracts, or rather the plague springs up in. And it is like literally the plague. It's like the bubonic plague of, the Black Death from the Middle Ages and all that stuff. So it spreads rapidly throughout the city, and they completely close off the city. They shut the gates, close the harbor. Everyone stays inside the city. And every character in the book kind of represents a different approach to the problem of the plague, which is, of course, an existentialist problem, right? And so, you have doctors, you have religious figures, you have thieves, all these different types of people who try from their own particular perspectives to deal with this issue of how do we live in this new circumstance of the plague. It's ultimately a very hopeful book. A lot of times existentialism will get saddled with this sort of like pessimistic view on life, that everything is meaningless and all of this sort of stuff. And you don't get that with Camus. He certainly looks the abyss straight in the eye. He does not shy away from the tragedy and the what appears to be meaninglessness of the entire event, but it ultimately ends on a hopeful note. And I think it's just a wonderful philosophical reflection and a beautiful piece of literature, which of course is translated. Camus wrote in French. So the translation I prefer comes from the Vintage International Publishing Company. Let me see if it says who actually translated this one. Okay, it's translated by Stuart Gilbert. But when you go to, whatever bookstore, Amazon or whatever, it seems like Vintage Books kind of has the market cornered on Camus. So that's probably what will pop up.
So a question I have for you was, when the pandemic started, was this your first time reading The Plague? Because I know for a fact you've read other works of Camus before.
Yeah, this was my first reading of it. Yeah, I'd read it. Of course, I read The Stranger. Pretty much every high schooler reads that particular work. And I've always wanted to read The Plague. And then, of course, a literal plague happened. And I was like, okay, it's time to read this book. And it was just really, I mean, when you talk about a book that deals with the issues that the plague does, with all the death and the bodies and hospitals, and it sounds strange, but the book was refreshing to read in the middle of the pandemic. But yeah, this is my first reading of it, and I've read it once again since.
Speaking about plagues, I think that brings next to a book that we both share on the list. I think it's Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. I first found out about this book when I got home from school, when I was sent home during the beginning of the pandemic in March of 2020. I was on YouTube looking for things to do, and I saw this video from Ryan Holiday, who I think is kind of a popular, I'm not going to call him a popular philosopher because I don't think he really is, but yeah, I would say he's a...
I'll agree with you on that point.
I would say he's a popular self-help author. And I think that I watched the video and I was just like, this is super interesting. So I ordered a copy, kept watching some more of his videos, and read Meditations. And I think that I was surprised on how relevant everything was in the book. We've done an entire episode on this, so I'm not going to really give much background. But the book is really influential for me because I think it helped me deal with that period. Maybe not deal with, it's the right word, but it helped me think differently about the period as more of an opportunity. And I think that time was a big inflection point in my life after reading that book, because I started getting interested in classical philosophy. I mean, that was the literal spark of my interest in classics. So after that, I started reading a lot of classics, and I got involved with a reading group where we were reading Cicero because of Marcus Aurelius, and it was just a really transformative book for me. I don't know if it was direct, but yeah, super transformative book. So I have to include that. I know, Mr. Parsons, this was on your list too, so why did you include it?
I mean, for all the reasons you just said, episode 6 is the one we did on Marcus Aurelius, and it is a book filled with practical wisdom. I think that's the best thing about it, is you read it and it's so applicable to living, whether we're talking about 200 AD or right now in 2021. It's written in a nonlinear fashion. There's no rhyme or reason to the entries, really. It's just Marcus Aurelius's, who is the Roman emperor in the 2nd century. It's his morning journals, so his morning thoughts. So there's no real particular order to any of the topics he talks about. They're generally very short entries. So there's, it doesn't take long to read a couple entries, and each of those entries gives you something to chew on, gives you something to think about. And for me, like encouragement, honestly, like if anyone dealt with pressure, it's Marcus Aurelius as the Roman emperor, right? People were constantly demanding things of him and dealing with intense political situations and all that sort of stuff. And if he can navigate those things successfully, Well, then I can too. And the things that he writes and the way that he writes them are very encouraging. Totally recommend everyone should read that
Yeah,
book.
I definitely agree. I was reading this book by, I forget what it's called, but who wrote it, but it's called The Rise of Theodore Roosevelt, and it's mentioned many times that Theodore Roosevelt had that in his saddlebag when he was doing his hunting activities, and it was on his desk when he was president. So if you don't take our advice for it, just look in how important that book has been historically for people. So I recommended it too. And I think we're going to recommend the same translation. So I'll let you handle that.
Oh, sure. Yeah, that's the Modern Library is the publisher, but it's I believe it's Gregory.
Yes.
Hang on, let me look in the front. Yeah, Gregory Hayes is the translation. There is a new translation that came out with annotations.
I heard about that.
Robin Waterfield, and it's an annotated edition. So there's a lot of really exceptional insights that he adds with his annotations for that text, which people who really enjoy meditations might find interesting, but still prefer the Hayes translation.
Yeah.
One of my ways that I truly show people that I care about them is I give them books. If you ever get a book from me, like, it's not an accident. Like, it wasn't just a random gift idea. Like, when I give a book, it's because it's an important book and I think it's important to your life. I routinely give this book, Meditations, to people. And one other book I'm going to mention here later on, I also have given that to people rather frequently. So it's up there. It's a good one.
Yeah, that sounds good. I've decided that over winter break, I'm going to try to get a Greek copy of that and see if I can work my way through it. So that'll be, I probably won't be able to get very far, but we'll try. We'll try.
Okay, so I have two women philosophers on my list today, and this next one is Mary Midgley. So Mary Midgley was an Oxford product from the 1940s and World War II, and she did not begin writing philosophy until she was in her 50s. She always said in interviews why it took her so long, and she said she had to wait till she was 50 to figure out what she really thought, which I think is a great little quote. But anyway, she just passed away a year and a half ago at the age of 99. She was a prolific writer. There are so many books I could recommend by her. One of the things I really enjoy about her writing is it's very clear and accessible, and she uses a lot of great analogies. For instance, when she talks about what philosophy is, she talks about plumbing, and how the pipes underneath the sink are things we never really take a good look at and we really ignore all the time. We focus on the faucet because that's what we see and that's what we use. But the pipes underneath the sink are perhaps the most important part of the faucet, and we never pay attention to them until something goes wrong. And then all of a sudden we open that cabinet up and we see all the pipes. And she says philosophy is like plumbing. It's really important. It undergirds like all of our behavior and beliefs and everything, but we really don't pay attention to it until something goes wrong. So she uses analogies like that all the time. I could mention many books, but the one that I'll bring up specifically is her last book, which she published the year before she died. So let's all hope we're as prolific as Mary Midgley, writing books in our late 90s. It's called What is Philosophy For? And it's just an exploration. Well, I mean, the title kind of says it all. What is the purpose of philosophy? Another thing I like about her, she's not an absolutist. She really likes to cover the entire field of whatever topic she is investigating, and brings a lot of perspective to it. This particular book focuses on like what exactly is philosophy to begin with, and then she harps a lot on scientism, and then she gets into like minds and other minds and all of that kind of stuff, and and gets into whether or not intelligence can be measured and what is materialism and all of these types of things, all exploring what is philosophy for. So everyone, grab a copy of this. But what is philosophy for? Excellent read and a good introduction, I think, to a lot of big ideas in philosophy.
I remember you talking about Mary Midgley when we were when we were still doing the book reviews a little bit. So have you gone back to her works at all since then?
Yeah, I did. Maybe it was during the summer or maybe early fall semester. I read another book of hers that was published about 8 or 10 years ago called Are You an Illusion? And it dealt a lot with the mind-body problem. And, from she really does not appreciate some of the views of science. Not that she doesn't think it's important, but she thinks it's oftentimes far too narrow. And anyway, yeah, she talks about consciousness in that book. Yeah, I mean, she's just great to read. This sounds odd. She's fun to read. She's just a fun author. She really plays with ideas in a creative way and doesn't hold back. Maybe that's some of the great things of her writing in her 90s. She's a sassy lady. She doesn't hold back on her opinions. She fires away.
Well, I guess I can contrast that a lot with my next book on the list. I don't think anybody's surprised about this one too. A lot of classics right now, but with Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics. Aristotle always, in contrast to Plato, he always takes in the opinion of the crowd and wants to see how correct that is, or the opinion from experts too. So Aristotle's always he's always talking about, popular opinion is this idea, so we should take a few pages to examine it. So Nicomachean Ethics is my third book on the list because it's really good. You can contrast it a lot with Plato's Republic. Plato's Republic, I always say, I think I've used this analogy on this podcast, but maybe with the class that I'm TAing for too. Plato's Republic is like an onion, and an infinite onion where you're always going to be peeling back the layers on layers and really trying to figure out what Socrates or Plato is trying to say by a statement. There's Socratic irony literally with every syllable that Socrates says, and it's so difficult but also really easy. And I think you can really contrast that with Aristotle, who it's his priority to make everything as clear as possible. Every word is specifically chosen, and every idea is developed as well as it can be. So I think it's a great point of contrast. Of course, both works are great. The Nicomachean Ethics we've also talked about, but it's a work about ethical philosophy on how one can live the best life. And so I think Aristotle's really interesting because I think he presents a more, I guess the word is more, it's more compelling, more realistic case of how to develop your character and how to live a good life than I think Socrates does, since he takes a lot more into account of external goods like wealth and political power and things like this, and the pursuit of a good life. Now, we can agree or disagree about that, but I think it's interesting point of contrast. So I think the personal reason I put this on the list for myself is it's been informative in my way of looking at philosophy as a whole. It's provided a great foundation for me for reading every other philosophical text. And I think it's provided a really good, it's a really good starting place for all sorts of philosophy, especially after you read Republic. It's also super in-depth. You can squeeze it out for infinity and get more out, but I've learned so much by poring over that book, not only in Aristotle, but in everything else. There's this really good other philosophy podcast called The History of Philosophy Without Any Gaps. And he spends a lot of time on Aristotle too in that podcast. But he says that, there's this famous expression that everything's a footnote to Plato. It's like, okay, that's true, but I think in reality, everything is a footnote to Aristotle in the sense of everything in that extent with philosophy, but with religion and with science and literally rhetoric and writing and everything else.
Yeah, Aristotle is just as foundational as Plato. And I think you take both of those philosophers and, in a sense, you have all of philosophy wrapped up in those two philosophers. To say that they were giants of philosophy is that there's no hyperbole. You can just keep going with those types of statements. And they both represent, in a way, the two halves, two approaches to epistemology, to metaphysics, to ethics, to all of those things. And Nicomachean Ethics is a wonderful and very accessible read, right? Would you say?
Oh, it's completely accessible in the sense that it's a relatively short work. It's 10 books. I don't know why I'm thinking about that, but it's 10 books, and each book is about 10 pages or so, I think. So it's a little more than 100 pages. And so you can read it pretty easily. It's not as easy to read as, in my opinion at least, it's not as easy to read as The Republic, because Republic's kind of a fun story. It's definitely not as easy to read as Meditations, but it's very clear, very precise language is used. So I think it's extremely accessible. If I would recommend a translation to anyone, it would be the W.D. Ross translation, or if you're really interested in Aristotle, I would recommend the complete works of Aristotle. Nicomachean Ethics is in volume 2, and it's edited by Jonathan Barnes, and it's the revised Oxford translation. So that's a lot of good stuff. Highly recommend.
Yeah, and that's something important to note about probably all the philosophical works we're talking about today, that they're accessible. It takes no special knowledge to try to decipher these things. There are some philosophers who are notoriously difficult to understand and read. But the ones that we're mentioning, which is kind of like part of the podcast, is trying to make philosophy accessible. And one of the reasons I think that Plato and Aristotle are still so popular all these years later, is not only their brilliant ideas, but the way in which they communicate it, which is very accessible.
100% agree.
Okay, my next book is a biography. So in 16th century France, there lived a man by the name of Montaigne. This is his last name. And he is responsible for one of the most thorough, introspective journals that you could probably imagine. I think it's just referred to as the Essays. And if you get like the full complete edition, it's going to be like 1,500 pages or whatever. He writes on so many topics. But the thing that's interesting about it is they're just incredibly personal, incredibly introspective. And again, a lot of it has to do with how to live a good life. But if you don't want to read the essays, if you'd rather have some insight and commentary on the life of Montaigne and his essays, one of the best biographers in philosophy, in my opinion, these days is Sarah Bakewell. She's also written another biography on some of the existentialists. Yeah, it's called At the Existentialist Cafe. Another great read. I've read both of these. But Montaigne is such an intriguing figure. And Sarah Bakewell does such a wonderful job of unpacking him, not only biographically, but also it's not just a strict biography of this is what he did in his life, but it ties all of that into his essays that he wrote, which are all, like I said, incredibly intriguing in terms of how to live with certain things, how to die with dignity, what to do in morally questionable situations, all of these things. And so you get a bit of philosophy with the biography. And that's, for me, that's how I enjoy philosophical biographies. Just hearing about the person's life is interesting, of course, but when you tie in their philosophy and then talk about it in such a intriguing and meaningful way as Bakewell does, you just end up with a really great book. So it's another example of a book that I think is very good for, an introduction to philosophy. So there's that one. Oh, I don't even think I said the title. Hang on. Yes. So it's called How to Live or A Life of Montaigne. Here's some of the titles of the chapters. How to Live, Don't Worry About Death. Chapter 2, Pay Attention. Chapter 4, Read a Lot. Chapter 5, How to Survive Love and Loss. Chapter 7, Question Everything. Chapter 11, Live Temperately. So it's just full of lots of really insightful advice. So check that one out, folks. How to Live or A Life of Montaigne by Sarah Bakewell.
I definitely agree with you. There's only a few good philosophy biographies that are really both philosophical and a good biography. It is nice when you find one of those. So I just put that in my shopping cart.
Oh, good. Yeah, it's fantastic.
So my last book is kind of an odd one, I think for definitely for people who know me, but it's called either On the Nature of Things or The Way Things Are. The official title is called De Rerum Natura. It's a book by the philosopher/poet Lucretius, and the reason I think it would be surprising to a lot of people is because it's a book on Epicurean philosophy. And so in that way, it's slightly different where, Mr. Parsons and I are usually more putting pleasure down and other goods up, but I think it's still a good read. It's very different from normal philosophical works in the way that it's a poem. I forget what the technical word is to describe it, but is it a didactic? No, it's not a didactic poem. Anyway, it's just it's kind of a long, multi-book poem about Epicureanism and why, it's just a normal work of philosophy and the other sense of things too, right? It's a really good book. I was quite surprised when I read it, but I was recommended it by someone. I think it's the only this is a contentious point, but I would say it's the only original Roman philosophical works written in Rome. So I'd like to read the first line of book 3, which I think it just kind of shows you how it's different. O glory of the Greeks, the first to raise the shining light out of the tremendous dark, illuminating the blessings of our life. You are the one I follow, and your steps I tread, not as a rival, but for love of your example. Does the swallow vie with swans? Do wobbly-legged little goats compete in strength and speed with your thoroughbreds? So I think it's kind of odd, but it's really interesting, and it's really good work on Epicureanism. Now, I don't necessarily buy everything in it, but I think it's kind of fun, quirky, non-conventional, and so I think if you are looking for something really accessible and really good too, right? I recommend this book.
Oh, that's cool. Because this is yet another form of philosophy we've talked about. So we've talked about biographies, we've talked about primary source, which is prose. We've talked about things like Marcus Aurelius, which is journals, and in some ways, some of his entries are aphorisms in a way. And here we have an example of poetry. So another category, I guess, of how philosophy can be presented. So that's really cool. I have Lucretius on my shelf, but I've never read it. I better get on that. You'll get after me.
It's a really good work, and I recommend a translation from Rolfe Humphreys. I don't think I've read too many. I think he's the only translation that I've read, but I was recommended the translation by someone that I trust very much. So I recommend that translation.
Awesome. Love it. Okay, well, that brings us to my last choice, and that is a book that was published probably late 2019. I'd have to look, but if not early 2020, so it's a very current book. It is a book by John Cagg, and it's called Sick Souls, Healthy Minds, How William James Can Save Your Life. So this is another style of writing. John Cagg uses his own experiences and connects those with a particular philosopher that he's exploring. So it's kind of a memoir, like it's a memoir of Cagg's life, but also unpacking a particular philosopher. His other two books are Hiking with Nietzsche and American Philosophy. So they're all really wonderful books, but the reason I mentioned this one, and this is another one that I've given to many people, is this book came to me at a very important time in my life where I was struggling with some mental health issues. And William James, which by the way, we did an episode on him with guest Jeffrey Howard. I think that was episode 14, where we talk about pragmatism. But William James, the great American pragmatist, philosopher, and psychologist, talks a lot about suicide. And, he has this famous line where he says, "Is life worth living?" Well, it depends on the liver. It depends on the person doing the living. Like he doesn't shy away from some difficulties mentally, and William James struggled with these issues as well. And so does Cagg. And so that's why these two, Cagg's memoir and then William James's philosophy really link up well in this book. And he talks about a lot of really encouraging things of how William James and he himself have navigated some of these difficulties in both of their lives. Talks about the importance of experience and the ideas of streams of consciousness, and how what you might feel one minute can be very different the next minute, and that all deals with consciousness. And it's just a very inspiring book, really, that helped me, and I think helps many people. It's a very popular book, helps many people wrestle or deal with some of the mental health issues that they might have. William James is sometimes also associated with like cognitive behavioral therapy, which is a very popular form of therapy. So anyway, it's a really great book. If you are struggling with some mental health issues, I highly recommend it. If you're just interested in pragmatism as a way of living, I think that's also very beneficial as a way of living. So either one, it's a really great book. Highly recommend it.
It's on my book list now.
Dude, it's so good.
Really?
It's so good. I'm
excited to check it out.
He unpacks like what pragmatism is in such an accessible way, but then at the same time makes it really meaningful for anyone. It's not like you have to be dealing with heavy mental health issues. We all struggle with mental health issues, what we think other people think of us and things like that. We all get caught in these little thought spirals from time to time, where we worry about the future too much and these types of things. So it doesn't have to be anything as heavy as something like suicide, which William James dealt with. It's just really beneficial for anyone's mental health and frame of reference in mind and all of that kind of stuff. It's a great book.
That sounds good. I have too many books to add to my list for winter break, so it's going to be another reason for taking our short sabbatical.
Yeah. We'll probably have to do an episode on it or something. Okay. All right, folks, that's it for our book review. Hope you really enjoyed those. We will get those up on the website eventually. Whoever handles that website sometimes falls behind. I don't know who that is, but he really needs to get it together. But we'll get these recommendations up on the website as well, so you can reference back to those. But for now, for the last time of season 1, it's time to head over to the Quote Corner. Okay, everyone, welcome to the Quote Corner, a very popular segment of our show where we take a philosophy quote entirely out of context and discuss it for a few minutes and then give it an arbitrary rating on 5 stars. So we did not choose a quote today, but in my phone, I keep quotes in an app, and I number those quotes, and I have over 700 quotes in my phone. So
it's crazy.
So what we're it might be crazy. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to hit a random number generator and see which quote comes up. All right, here we go. This is very exciting. Are you excited, Andrew?
I'm beyond excited.
Okay, here we go. It's quote number 607. So let me look that up.
Oh my gosh.
Let's see here. 607. Oh, it's by American political philosopher Hannah Arendt. Okay.
Oh my goodness.
So here's the quote, which actually doesn't have anything to do with politics, but that's okay. All right, here we go. It says, Forgiving is the only reaction which does not merely react, but acts anew and unexpectedly, unconditioned by the act which provoked it, and therefore freeing from its consequences both the one who forgives and the one who is forgiven.
Oh my goodness.
It's kind of a lot to think about without actually looking at it, I'm sure. On your end.
It is a lot to think about.
You want me to read it again?
No, it's okay. I think that's what our audience deals with. So I'm putting myself on the hot seat.
Okay. Yes, Andrew's not seen this, so
first reactions, live reactions.
That's right.
I think it sounds to me like a pretty good quote. I think forgiveness is an essential skill, and well, I don't know the content. I don't know the context either, and that's right. It is every time it is taken out of context. So I don't know, but I'm guessing if she is a political philosopher, I can see how that would be important in a community, in a political community where you're going to have to be interacting with people. So forgiveness does seem good. It does seem like it's a beneficial action that's quite unique on its own. What do you think about it, Mr. Parsons? Can you give me some illumination?
Well, every time I look back at some of these quotes, I'm like, where did I even get that from? I probably saw it on Twitter. I do like Hannah Arendt, though. I don't think we've even talked about her this whole first season.
No, I don't think so.
Her big famous book is called The Origins of Totalitarianism, which became very popular in about 2016. You can make some political associations there if you would like to. But this book that she wrote in the 50s really took off. Forgiveness is such an interesting idea, especially in the context of virtue. You and I, Andrew, put a lot of stock in the idea of virtues. And, I would say forgiveness falls under the virtue of justice. And, oh gosh, there's just so many colloquialisms around to err is human, to forgive is divine, and these types of things. I don't know what my reaction is to the quote, other than I think forgiving is such an act of pure lack of ego that it's a very rare thing to be given in its purest form, but so important for the social fabric, right? If we're unable to forgive those that we don't agree with, then we're in trouble. And so whether that forgiveness is disingenuous, whether or not we say we forgive that person and don't mean it, that's better than not forgiving at all and letting that fester and being able to let go of things, to be able to apologize to someone and say, I am sorry. And then in return, that person hopefully then issues you forgiveness. I think that might be more important than being able to tell someone that you love them. It's almost like love is an expression of forgiveness. Ooh, hey, that was kind of smart sounding. Anyway, I don't know much about the quote, but those are kind of my thoughts on forgiveness, right? It's consequences both from the one who forgives and the one who is forgiven. It's important on both parts, both participants.
No, I think that was a really good. It's better than anything that I could say about it. So I won't say much more, but I will ask you, putting it on you this time. What do you think about the quote?
Well, like you, I've only read it once. I'm not sitting here staring at it, to make things fair. So I only heard it once, and I think it's important to focus on forgiveness, no matter what the content of the quote is, that I can't remember very well. So I'll give this 4 stars.
I'll give it 4 stars as well. I think it sounds like a pretty good quote, and I think you made some good points about it. So it seems worthy of some 4 stars.
Okay, what a way to end season 1. 4 stars. We are in agreement.
The stars are aligned.
That's right.
All right, everybody. That's going to be it for season 1. Thank you for spending your valuable time with us over the past year. and today as well.
We'd really love it if you leave a positive review and hit that subscribe button wherever you listen to podcasts. So this time, you'll know when season 2 drops. And of course, pass it on to your friends. The more the merrier.
Yeah, we're looking forward to seeing everybody's friends in season 2. But to do that, by hitting that subscribe button, and remember to email us at opendoorphilosophy@gmail.com for any ideas about season 2, any topics that you'd like for us to cover, or let us know on Twitter or Instagram with topics you'd like for us to talk about in season 2, or any quotes for us to check out.
Yeah, I mean, if we don't, we will forgive you, but but we'll also be very sad. And like Andrew said, you can follow All the Philosophy on Twitter and Instagram, and our website, opendoorphilosophy.com, where you can find many things about the show, including our book lists.
I guess this is our ultimate thank you to Kevin MacLeod for the free use of his music that we use in the intro and outro. Thank you so much for listening to us this season. We'll see you next time. And remember, when your life seems in need of some philosophy, the door is always open. We'll see you in January.
See you in January. Bye, everyone.
Bye.